Story 1. The Elevator to Floor 13. I've worked as a medical equipment technician at Mercy General Hospital in Portland for 17 years, and I thought I'd seen every corner of that building. The hospital was built in 1952, a 12-story concrete monument to mid-century institutional architecture. I knew the layout better than my own apartment. Every storage room, every utility corridor, every service elevator. Or at least I thought I did. My job kept me moving constantly through the building, wheeling machines from one department to another, calibrating equipment, performing maintenance. I preferred the night shifts. The pay differential was better, and I could work without doctors breathing down my neck about timelines. Plus, there was something peaceful about the hospital at 3 in the morning when the chaos of the day shift faded to occasional codes and the quiet hum of life support machines. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed. I'd received a maintenance request for an ultrasound machine on the 7th floor maternity ward. Simple job. Replace a faulty transducer head, run diagnostics. Maybe 45 minutes total. I finished around 2:47 a.m. according to my work phone, gathered my tools, and headed for the service elevator at the east end of the building. The service elevators were ancient, original to the building, with brass fixtures that had been polished smooth by decades of hands. They were slower than the public elevators, but more reliable for heavy equipment. I'd ridden them thousands of times. I pressed the call button and waited, listening to the mechanical grinding as the car ascended from somewhere far below. The doors opened with their familiar metallic scrape. I wheeled my equipment cart inside and pressed the button for B2, the second basement level where I kept my workshop. The doors closed and the elevator began its descent with that characteristic lurch I'd felt 10,000 times before. Floor 7, floor 6, floor 5, then the elevator shuddered. Not the normal vibration of old machinery, but a violent shake that made my tools rattle in their cases. The lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The floor indicator above the door, which had shown a glowing 4, went dark for a moment. When it lit up again, it displayed 13. That made me pause. Mercy General only had 12 floors. There was no 13th floor, a common superstition in older buildings where the numbering jumped from 12 to 14. Except we didn't have a 14th floor either. 12 was the top. I assumed it was a malfunction, a glitch in the ancient display panel. These elevators were overdue for replacement. I'd filed reports about their deteriorating condition for the past 5 years, but the hospital administration always had other priorities. I reached for the button panel, intending to stop the elevator and restart it. That's when I noticed the button panel had changed. Where there should have been 12 numbered buttons plus basement levels, there were now 14 buttons. The button marked 13 glowed with a soft red light. I stared at it, my mind struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be true. I'd been in this elevator hours ago. There had been no 13th floor button. There couldn't be a 13th floor button. The elevator continued downward, or what I assumed was downward. The motion felt wrong somehow, like we were moving sideways or at an angle. My inner ear couldn't quite make sense of the sensation. I pressed the B2 button repeatedly. Nothing happened. The glowing 13 on the display didn't change. After what felt like several minutes but was probably only 30 seconds, the elevator lurched to a stop. The doors opened. I've tried many times to describe what I saw when those doors slid apart, and words always feel inadequate. It wasn't another floor of Mercy General Hospital. The space beyond the elevator was a corridor, yes, but wrong in every detail. The walls were the same institutional green as the rest of the hospital, but the paint was fresh, glossy, unmarred by the scuffs and scratches that accumulated in any working hospital. The floor was polished linoleum, reflecting the fluorescent lights above with mirror clarity. But it was the silence that struck me first. Hospitals are never truly silent. There's always something. The beep of monitors, the hiss of oxygen lines, the distant conversation of nurses at a station, the rumble of HVAC systems. This corridor was absolutely quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, dead quiet. I didn't want to leave the elevator, but I was curious in that stupid way people are curious about things they shouldn't be curious about. I wedged my equipment cart in the doorway to prevent the doors from closing and stepped out into the corridor. The air smelled antiseptic, but underneath that clinical scent was something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a broken freezer. The corridor stretched about 50 feet in either direction. Doors lined both sides, each with a small rectangular window at eye level and a room number. 1301, 1302, 1303. I approached the nearest door and looked through the window. The room beyond was a standard hospital room, or a version of one. There was the usual adjustable bed, the monitoring equipment, the small bathroom visible through a partially open door. But the bed was made with corners so crisp and tight they looked painful. The monitoring equipment was plugged in, screens glowing with ready displays but not connected to any patient, because there was no patient. The room was empty and spotless and waiting. I checked the next window. Same thing. Empty room, made bed, equipment ready, the third room, the fourth. Every single room on that corridor was identical, prepared and empty as if expecting an influx of patients that never arrived. I should have gotten back in the elevator right then. Every instinct I had was screaming that this place was wrong. But I noticed something at the far end of the corridor, a nurse's station just like the ones on every floor of the hospital. The desk was neat, paperwork stacked in precise piles. A computer monitor glowed blue, and sitting at the desk, perfectly still, was a nurse. Relief flooded through me. Another person? Someone who could explain this, tell me what floor I was actually on, laugh about the elevator malfunction. I started walking toward her, my footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. "Excuse me," I called out. My voice sounded muffled, like the air itself was absorbing the sound. "I think I got off on the wrong floor." The nurse didn't move. As I got closer, I could see she was wearing a traditional white nurse's uniform, the kind they stopped using in the 1970s. Her dark hair was pinned up under a white cap. She sat with her hands folded on the desk, staring straight ahead at nothing. "Excuse me," I said again, now only a few feet away. Close enough to see that her skin was too pale, her posture too rigid. Close enough to see that her chest wasn't moving, she wasn't breathing. I reached out against every instinct and touched her shoulder. She was cold. Not corpse cold, but like she was made of wax or plastic. My touch did nothing. She remained frozen in position, a mannequin dressed as a nurse from half a century ago. That's when I heard it. From somewhere down the corridor I'd just walked, a sound. Wheels squeaking. The distinctive squeak of a hospital gurney, the kind with one wheel that never quite rolled straight no matter how much you oiled it. I turned around. A gurney was rolling slowly down the corridor, emerging from one of the rooms I'd checked. There was someone on it, covered head to toe with a white sheet. But there was no one pushing it. It rolled by itself, that squeaking wheel counting off each rotation as it moved toward me. I backed up against the nurse's station, unable to look away from the approaching gurney. The shape under the sheet was wrong. Too large in some places, too angular in others, like whatever was underneath didn't quite fit human proportions. And the sheet itself wasn't lying flat. It was moving, subtle ripples running across its surface, as if what was beneath it was breathing, or trying to. The gurney stopped about 10 feet from me. The squeaking wheel fell silent. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sheet began to slide off, pulled by something underneath. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. I sprinted back to the elevator, my shoes slapping against that too perfect linoleum. The gurney started rolling again behind me, faster now, the squeaking becoming frantic. I could hear other sounds joining it, more gurneys emerging from multiple rooms, all converging on the corridor. More squeaking wheels, more sheets, rustling. I reached the elevator and grabbed my equipment cart, yanking it back inside. I hammered the close door button, pressing it over and over. The doors began to slide shut with agonizing slowness. Through the narrowing gap, I could see gurneys filling the corridor, a traffic jam of them all facing the elevator. The sheets were falling away now, and I caught glimpses of what was underneath. Shapes that were almost human, almost right, but fundamentally wrong in ways my mind couldn't fully process. The doors closed with a final clang. I slumped against the elevator wall, gasping. My hands were shaking as I pressed the B2 button, then the first floor button, then every button I could reach. The elevator lurched and began to move. The floor indicator showed 13 for a long moment, then blinked and changed to 12, then 11, then 10. When the doors opened on the second basement level, I nearly wept with relief. It was my workshop, tools on pegboards, equipment in various states of repair, my desk with its cold coffee mug and scattered work orders. Real, familiar, normal. I stumbled out and sat down at my desk, trying to calm my breathing. I picked up my phone to check the time. 2:51 a.m., 4 minutes. I'd been gone for 4 minutes. I didn't report what happened. Who would believe me? I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I convinced myself it was stress or carbon monoxide exposure or some kind of waking dream. For 3 days, I avoided the service elevators entirely, using the public elevators or the stairs. But on Friday night, a ventilator failed on the 9th floor. Critical equipment, lives at stake. The public elevators were crammed with visitors leaving after evening hours. The stairs meant hauling 60 pounds of equipment up 9 flights. I took the service elevator. I stood in front of the button panel before pressing anything, examining it carefully. 12 numbered buttons, B1 and B2 for the basement levels, 14 buttons total. Normal. Exactly as it should be. I pressed 9 and the elevator rose smoothly. 9 floors. No problems. When I finished the repair and called the elevator to go back down, I stood in the car and studied that button panel again. 12 numbered buttons. I pressed B2. The elevator descended. As we passed the 6th floor, the lights flickered. My stomach dropped. The display showed 5, then 4, then went dark. When it lit up again, it showed 13. The doors opened to that same impossibly pristine corridor. But this time, all the room doors were open, and standing in each doorway, perfectly still, was a figure in white. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, or things dressed like them, all wearing uniforms from different eras of the hospital's history, all staring at the elevator, at me. In the center of the corridor, directly facing the elevator, was a gurney. The sheet covering it was already pulled back. The space underneath was empty. Waiting, I lunged for the button panel and pressed every button simultaneously, using both fists to hammer them all at once. The doors began to close. The figures in the doorways started moving toward the elevator, all in perfect synchronization. Their movements were wrong. Too fluid, joints bending in ways joints shouldn't bend. The gurney began rolling forward. The doors closed. The elevator lurched downward so violently I fell to my knees. The lights went completely out. I was in absolute darkness, feeling the elevator shake and rattle around me. Something hit the roof of the car, a heavy thump that dented the metal ceiling panel inward, then another, then scratching, like fingernails on metal dragging across the roof. The lights flickered back on. The display showed B2. The doors opened to my workshop. I crawled out on my hands and knees. As the doors closed behind me, I looked back at the roof of the elevator car. The ceiling panel was pristine, undamaged, as if nothing had happened. That was 4 months ago. I still work at Mercy General, though I've requested a transfer to day shift. They're processing it. In the meantime, I use the stairs exclusively, regardless of how much equipment I have to carry or how many floors I have to climb. Other technicians complain about the service elevators. They're slow, they smell funny, the lights flicker. Normal old building problems. But last week I was in the administrative office filing paperwork and I found something in the hospital archives while waiting. Floor plans from the original 1952 construction. I shouldn't have looked. I wish I hadn't looked. The original plans showed 13 floors. Floor 13 was designed as an isolation ward for contagious diseases, back when tuberculosis and polio were still common fears. According to the records, Floor 13 was sealed in 1968 after an outbreak of an unidentified infectious condition that killed 17 patients and 3 staff members. The hospital administration decided to seal the entire floor rather than sterilize it. The official records were amended and Floor 12 became the top floor, but they didn't remove it. They just stopped acknowledging it existed. And somewhere in the building, in those service elevators that run from the second basement to the roof, there's still a button that shouldn't be there. A floor that shouldn't exist. And it's waiting for the next person to see that number 13 light up red in the darkness. I put in my resignation this morning. My last day is in 2 weeks. I've already accepted a position at a small medical clinic across town. Single story, brand new building. No elevators at all. Some of my colleagues think I'm crazy taking a pay cut to work at a clinic. They don't know what's waiting in the spaces between the floors. And if I'm lucky, they never will. Story 2. The patient in room 217. Dr. Jennifer Martinez had been an attending physician in the BAMU emergency department at Riverside Memorial Hospital for 9 years before she met the patient who would make her question everything she understood about death. It was a humid August night in Baltimore, the kind where the air feels thick enough to drink, when the ambulance brought him in at 11:43 p.m. Male, approximately 60 years old, found unresponsive in an alley by construction workers. The paramedic rattled off as they wheeled the gurney through the automatic doors. No ID, no pulse, no respiration. We've been doing CPR for 22 minutes, called it 3 times, but dispatch kept saying to continue transport. Jennifer took one look at the man and knew he was dead. She'd seen enough bodies to recognize it instantly. The particular color of skin when blood stops flowing, the absolute stillness that's different from unconsciousness. His eyes were half open, clouded, and fixed. But protocol was protocol. She called the code and her team went to work. They worked on him for another 18 minutes. Chest compressions, epinephrine, defibrillation, nothing. The monitor showed a flat line that never wavered. Jennifer checked for pupil response, fixed and dilated. She palpated for a carotid pulse, nothing. She placed her stethoscope against his chest and heard absolute silence, no heartbeat, no breath sounds. Time of death, 12:01 a.m., she announced, stripping off her gloves. The team began the grim process of cleaning up, removing the tubes and IVs, preparing the body for the morgue. Jennifer started the paperwork. John Doe, 47 for the year, apparent cardiac arrest, no known next of kin. She'd written this report too many times. They transferred the body to a gurney and wheeled it to the hospital's temporary morgue, a refrigerated room in the basement where bodies waited for the medical examiner. But the morgue was full that night. A multi-vehicle accident on I-95 had brought in 5 DOAs earlier in the evening. The night supervisor made a decision. Put John Doe, 47, in a regular room until morning, when they could transfer him to the medical examiner's facility. They placed him in room 217, a private room on the second floor that was scheduled for renovation and wasn't taking regular patients. Jennifer signed off on the paperwork and moved on to the next case, a teenager with appendicitis, routine and alive. She didn't think about John Doe 47 again until almost 3 hours later when her pager went off with an urgent message. Code Blue, room 217. That wasn't possible. You couldn't code a corpse. She ran anyway, years of training overriding logic. When she burst through the door of room 217, she found 2 nurses standing frozen by the bed, their faces sheet white. The dead man's eyes were open, wide open and moving. His gaze tracked slowly across the ceiling, following something only he could see. He's been doing that for 2 minutes, one of the nurses whispered, a young woman named Kelly who Jennifer had never seen rattled before. I came to check the room before my break, and his eyes were just open, moving. Jennifer approached the bed, her medical training warring with the primal instinct to run. She'd seen post-mortem muscle spasms before. She'd seen bodies do strange things as they settled into death. But she'd never seen this. She reached for the man's wrist to check for a pulse, though she knew there wouldn't be one. There was. It was weak, irregular, barely there, but it was present. Jennifer grabbed her stethoscope with shaking hands and pressed it to the man's chest. A heartbeat, slow, with irregular pauses, but definitely a heartbeat. And breath sounds, shallow, rattling, but air was moving in and out of his lungs. Get a crash cart, she said quietly, and call Dr. Reeves. We need neurology. Over the next 15 minutes, they reconnected monitors and IVs. The man's vital signs were impossible. His heart rate fluctuated between 20 and 40 beats per minute, stopping completely for 10 or 15 seconds before stuttering back to life. His blood pressure was barely registrable. His oxygen saturation hovered in the 70s. By every measurable standard, he should be dead. But he wasn't. His eyes never stopped moving, tracking back and forth across the ceiling. His pupils would dilate, then constrict, then dilate again, responding to something but not to the light Jennifer shined in them. His lips moved occasionally as if he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Dr. Reeves arrived, a neurologist Jennifer respected for his steady competence. He examined the patient with growing confusion. His EEG is... I've never seen anything like this. There's activity, but it's not following any normal pattern. It's almost like his brain is receiving signals, but not from his own body. He looked at Jennifer. You're certain he was dead? Not nearly dead, not mostly dead, but actually dead? 40 minutes without a pulse, Jennifer confirmed. I called it myself. Believe me, Charles, he was gone. They stabilized him as much as they could, which wasn't much. His condition defied stabilization. It didn't worsen, but it didn't improve. He just existed in this strange state between life and death. His eyes moving, his heart occasionally beating, his chest sometimes rising with breath. Jennifer should have handed him off to the night intensivist and gone home when her shift ended at 7 a.m. But she couldn't leave. She pulled a chair into room 217 and sat watching him, trying to understand. Around 8:30 a.m., his lips moved again, and this time sound came out. A whisper so faint she had to lean close to hear. They're waiting, he breathed. Who's waiting? Jennifer asked, leaning closer. Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what happened to you? His eyes stopped their aimless wandering and locked onto hers. The sudden focus was startling. His pupils were completely black, dilated so wide there was almost no iris visible. They're waiting, he repeated slightly louder. In the hallway, in the walls, in the spaces between, they're all waiting. Who? Jennifer pressed. The others. His voice was clearer now, though still barely above a whisper. The ones who didn't leave. The ones who are stuck. They've been waiting so long. They thought I was one of them. They thought I was supposed to stay. A chill ran down Jennifer's spine. You were in an alley. Do you remember what happened? I was walking home from work. Late shift at the warehouse. His eyes drifted away from her face, focusing on something over her shoulder. There was a man blocking the sidewalk, lying down. I stopped to help. When I bent down, he grabbed me. His hand was so cold, he said, "Finally, a replacement." And then there was pain in my chest, and I couldn't breathe, and everything went dark. And then I was here, but not here. The hospital, but wrong. Everything was gray, the walls were gray, the floor was gray. There were people in the rooms, but they were gray too. And they were all staring at me. They came out of the rooms and surrounded me. They kept touching me, so cold, trying to pull me with them. They kept saying, "Stay, stay, you're supposed to stay." I tried to run, but there were more of them everywhere I turned. Jennifer wanted to dismiss this as hypoxic delusion, oxygen deprivation dreams, but something in his voice, in the terrible clarity of his gaze, made her keep listening. "I saw a light," he continued, "a red light glowing in one of the rooms. All the other lights were that flat dead gray, but this one was red and alive. The gray people were afraid of it. They backed away. I fought through them and got to the room. Inside was a body on a bed, my body. I could see doctors working on it, but everything was fading like I was watching through foggy glass." "That was us," Jennifer said softly. "We were trying to save you." "I know. I was watching from outside my body. I saw you stop, saw you write on your clipboard, saw them wheel me away. And when they did, the gray people came back. They were angry. They said I'd been marked, I'd been taken, I was supposed to stay with them. They started pulling me down the hallways, deeper into the gray place." His breathing became more labored. The monitors started alarming. Jennifer checked his vitals. His heart was stopping again, long pauses between beats. "But I fought," he gasped. "I fought because I saw something. A door, a room with a number on it. 217, the numbers were glowing red just like that light. I pulled away from them and ran. I got to the door and pushed through it, and I felt myself hit something solid, hit my body. I was back inside." The monitors were screaming now. His heart rate was dropping, oxygen desaturating. Jennifer called for the team, but she kept her eyes on him. "But they're still here," he whispered. "They followed me through. They're in the hallway right now, in the walls, in the ceiling. They're so angry that I got away. They keep whispering that if I won't stay, someone else has to. They need someone to take my place." His eyes rolled back. His heart stopped. Jennifer and her team worked frantically, but she knew it was different this time. Whatever had held him to life, whatever impossible thread had been keeping him in his body, had finally snapped. They worked for 15 minutes, but he was gone. Really gone this time. She called it at 9:02 a.m. Jennifer stepped out into the hallway to catch her breath and collect herself. The corridor was busy with the morning shift, nurses doing rounds, orderlies pushing meal carts, visitors arriving with flowers. Normal hospital activity, nothing gray, nothing wrong. She tried to shake off the unease the dead man's story had created. That night she came back for her shift with the whole incident filed away as a strange but explicable event. Neurological misfires, hypoxic hallucinations, the brain's last desperate attempt to make sense of dying. She'd almost convinced herself. Then Kelly didn't show up for her shift, the young nurse who'd found the dead man with moving eyes. She called in sick, which was unusual. Kelly was famously reliable. The next night, Kelly called in again. And the next. On the fourth night, Jennifer called Kelly's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called Kelly's emergency contact, her mother. "She won't come out of her room," Kelly's mother said, her voice tight with worry. "She hasn't eaten properly in 3 days. She just sits by her window and stares. When I ask what's wrong, she says she saw something at the hospital. Says there were people in the hallway that night who shouldn't have been there. Gray people, she calls them. I think she's having some kind of breakdown." Jennifer felt her stomach drop. She ended the call and immediately went to the second floor to room 217. It was empty now, cleaned and waiting for the renovation team. She stood in the doorway looking at the space where the impossible patient had lain. The temperature was wrong. The room was cold, much colder than the climate-controlled hospital air. She could see her breath. And in the corners of the room the shadows seemed darker than they should be, as if light couldn't quite reach them. She heard a sound behind her and spun around. The hallway was empty. But for just a moment, she could swear for just a moment, she'd seen figures standing there. Gray figures, dozens of them lining the corridor, watching her. When she blinked, they were gone. Jennifer requested a transfer the next day. She moved to a small urgent care clinic in the suburbs, taking a significant pay cut. She told herself it was for better hours, less stress. But she knows the truth. She knows what she saw in those last few seconds before she blinked. She knows Kelly saw them too. And sometimes, late at night when she's trying to sleep, she wonders about the man in room 217. He fought his way back from wherever the gray people had taken him. He refused to stay. But he said someone had to take his place. He said they needed a replacement. She wonders who they took instead. She wonders if it was Kelly, who disappeared into her room in her own mind. She wonders if it's someone else at Riverside Memorial, slowly fading into gray while they still walk the hallways. She wonders if those gray people are still waiting in the spaces between, in the walls and the ceiling of room 217, patient and hungry. Most of all, she wonders if she'll ever stop seeing them in her peripheral vision, standing just at the edge of sight. Gray figures in gray spaces watching, waiting, whispering about the ones who got away and the ones who need to stay. Story 3. The Night Janitor's Discovery. Marcus Webb had been cleaning Oakmont Psychiatric Hospital for 11 years when he found the door that wasn't supposed to exist. He was 63 years old, a quiet man who preferred the solitude of night shift work to the chaos of human interaction. The psychiatric hospital suited him perfectly. By 10 p.m., the patients were medicated and sleeping, the staff reduced to skeleton crews, and Marcus could work his way through the building in peaceful silence. He knew every inch of Oakmont. Built in 1889 as the Oakmont Asylum for the Insane, the Victorian Gothic structure sprawled across 12 acres of New Hampshire woods. Over the decades, it had been renovated, expanded, modernized, but the bones of the original building remained. Thick stone walls, arched corridors, and a layout that followed no logical pattern. Additions had been tacked on without consideration for coherent design, creating a maze of wings and hallways that confused new employees for months. But Marcus knew it all. Every storage closet, every utility room, every shortcut through the basement tunnels, or he thought he did until the night of November 17th. He was working the third floor of the East Wing, mopping the corridor outside the secure units. It was 2:30 a.m., and the only sounds were the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional muffled cry from behind the reinforced doors. Marcus worked with his earbuds in, listening to old jazz, letting the music carry him through the repetitive motions of mopping, dusting, collecting trash. He was emptying a waste bin when he noticed something odd about the wall at the end of the corridor. The East Wing terminated in a solid wall covered with the same institutional beige paint as the rest of the hospital. But tonight, in the harsh fluorescent light, he could see a seam in the wall. A rectangular outline, barely visible, about the size and shape of a door. Marcus approached it, curious. He'd walked past this wall thousands of times. There had never been a seam before. He ran his hand along the outline and felt a slight depression, a groove in the wall that his fingers could trace. His hand found a spot that felt different, slightly warmer than the surrounding wall. He pressed it. With a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to reveal darkness beyond. Marcus stared at it, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. A hidden door, in a wall he'd walked past for 11 years. How was that possible? He should have reported it. Should have called security, let them investigate. But curiosity overrode caution. He pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight, then pushed the door fully open. Behind it was a staircase. Stone steps, narrow and steep, descending into darkness. The walls were bare brick, not the painted drywall of the modern hospital. The air that wafted up smelled old, dust and decay and something else, something organic that made his nose wrinkle. The stairs looked original to the 1889 building, untouched by any renovation. Marcus descended. The staircase was longer than he expected, dropping at least 2 stories, maybe 3. His phone light illuminated only a few feet ahead, creating a small bubble of visibility in the oppressive dark. The temperature dropped as he went down until his breath was misting in the cold air. The stairs ended at another door, this one made of heavy wood with iron reinforcement bands. It was ajar. Marcus pushed it open and stepped into a corridor that made him gasp. It was a hospital corridor, but from another era. The walls were painted a sickly institutional green that had faded and peeled over decades. The floor was ancient linoleum, cracked and curling at the edges. Wire cage light fixtures hung from the ceiling, though no bulbs remained in them. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, each with a small barred window at eye level. This was part of the original asylum. It had to be. But according to every map Marcus had ever seen, this section didn't exist. The original asylum had been extensively remodeled in the 1950s. The Victorian-era treatment wards had been demolished or converted. There were no intact sections of the 1889 building remaining in the basement levels. Except, apparently, there were. Marcus walked slowly down the corridor, his phone light casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. He looked through the first barred window into a cell, and it was a cell, not a room. Tiny, perhaps 8 feet by 8 feet, with a metal bed frame bolted to the floor and nothing else. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them gouged into the plaster by fingernails or improvised tools. Words were scratched among the marks. "Help me, let me out, please, God, please." The second cell was the same, and the third. Every cell Marcus checked showed the same desperate scratches, the same pleading words carved into walls by long-dead patients. He felt sick, thinking about what this place had been. Asylums in 1889 were nightmares, places where the mentally ill were locked away and forgotten, treated like animals. He should leave. This was wrong, disturbing, a reminder of the cruel history of psychiatric care. But something pulled him forward. The corridor extended about 50 feet before ending at a larger door, this one with a sign hanging above it. The sign was wood, the letters burned into it in old-fashioned script, "Treatment Room." Marcus opened the door. The room beyond was larger than the cells, perhaps 20 feet square. Unlike the cells, which were empty, this room was full of equipment. Medical equipment, but designed with the brutal simplicity of 19th century psychiatry. A restraint chair dominated the center of the room. Heavy wood with leather straps for the arms, legs, torso, and head. Next to it was a wheeled cart holding instruments. Ice baths equipment, a crude device that Marcus recognized from history books as an early electroshock machine, and various metal implements whose purpose he didn't want to imagine. But what made Marcus's blood run cold were the walls. Every inch of wall space was covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all thumbtacked directly to the plaster. Photographs of patients. Black and white images of men and women in asylum gowns, their faces showing every stage of mental anguish. Terror, despair, rage. Blank catatonic staring. Many of the photographs showed patients mid-treatment, strapped into restraints, their faces twisted in screams. Marcus swept his phone light across the walls, and the faces seemed to move in the shifting shadows. He was about to leave, thoroughly unnerved, when his light caught something that made him freeze. In the far corner of the room, sitting in the restraint chair, was a patient. No, not possible. Marcus blinked hard, but the figure was still there. An old woman in a faded asylum gown strapped into the chair. Her head was slumped forward, stringy white hair hanging over her face. She was absolutely still. "Hello?" Marcus called out, his voice cracking. "Are you okay?" No response. He approached cautiously, his rational mind insisting this had to be a mannequin, a prop left from some long-ago training exercise. But as he got closer, he could see details that made his skin crawl. Her skin looked real, papery, and age-spotted. The straps holding her were genuine leather, darkened with age and use. He reached out to touch her shoulder to verify she wasn't real. His hand was an inch away when her head snapped up. Her eyes opened, filmed with cataracts but still focused directly on him. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream, lips pulling back to reveal teeth worn to nubs. Marcus stumbled backward, his phone clattering to the floor. The light rolled, creating wild spinning shadows. In those chaotic flashes of light and dark, he saw them. The chairs along the walls, chairs he hadn't noticed before, were filled with patients. Dozens of them, all strapped in place, all turning their heads to look at him. Their mouths opened in silent screams, their hands straining against the leather restraints. Marcus grabbed his phone and ran. He burst out of the treatment room and sprinted down the corridor, past the cells with their scratched walls. Behind him, he heard sounds. The creak of leather, the scrape of metal on stone, shuffling footsteps. He didn't look back. He hit the stairs and took them two at a time, gasping for breath. His 63-year-old heart was hammering dangerously. The door at the top was still open, thank God, and he threw himself through it into the third-floor corridor of the modern hospital. He slammed the hidden door shut and leaned against it, chest heaving. The corridor was exactly as he'd left it. His mop bucket sat where he'd abandoned it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Everything was normal. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands and checked the time. 3:47 a.m. He'd been down there for over an hour. He should report this. Should tell someone about the hidden wing, the preserved treatment room, the impossible patients. But who would believe him? And if he told them about the patients in the chairs, they'd think he was crazy. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe he'd had some kind of episode, a stress-induced hallucination. Marcus finished his shift in a daze. He said nothing to the morning staff when they arrived. He drove home, took a long shower, and tried to sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those faces. Those desperate, silent faces. He called in sick for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, he forced himself to go back. He had bills to pay, and he wasn't going to let one disturbing incident end his career. He avoided the 3rd floor of the East Wing entirely, working other sections of the hospital. Everything was fine. Normal. The routine helped him convince himself he'd imagined the whole thing. 2 weeks passed. Marcus almost had himself convinced it was a stress-related delusion. Then on December 1st, he was assigned to deep clean the 3rd floor of the East Wing. Budget cuts meant he was the only janitor on duty. He couldn't avoid it. He went to the end of the corridor where he'd found the hidden door, steeling himself. In the bright fluorescent light, the wall looked perfectly normal. Solid. No seams, no outlines, no hidden mechanism, just a regular wall. Marcus actually laughed with relief. He'd imagined it, after all. He was mopping the corridor when he heard a sound. A soft thumping, rhythmic and insistent. It was coming from the wall. Marcus approached it slowly, the sound getting louder. Thump, thump, thump. like someone knocking from the other side. The wall began to bulge outward, the paint cracking. A seam appeared, that familiar rectangular outline. The door was opening from the inside. Marcus dropped his mop and backed away. The door swung fully open, revealing the dark staircase, and standing at the top of the stairs, illuminated by the fluorescent light from the corridor, was the old woman from the restraint chair. Her asylum gown was rotting on her body. Her eyes were milk-white with cataracts. Her mouth was open in that silent scream. Behind her, filling the staircase, were the others. Dozens of patients in various states of decay, all wearing the same asylum gowns, all staring at Marcus with empty eyes. They began to move forward slowly, their movements jerky and wrong. Marcus ran. He ran down the corridor, through the security door that he had to badge through, down the stairs to the main floor. He ran past startled nurses and confused orderlies. He ran out of the hospital and to his car, and he drove away, and he never went back. He submitted his resignation by email. He ignored the calls from his supervisor asking for an explanation. He moved out of New Hampshire entirely, relocating to Florida, where there are no old asylums, no Gothic hospitals with dark histories. But sometimes late at night he hears that sound. Thump, 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 like someone knocking from the other side of a wall. And he knows that door he opened is still there, somewhere in Oakmont Psychiatric Hospital. The door that leads down to the section that shouldn't exist, where the patients from 1889 are still waiting for their treatment to end. The hospital hired a new night janitor. A young guy, mid-20s, who needed the money and didn't mind working alone. Marcus wonders if he's found the door yet, wonders if he's curious enough to go down those stairs, wonders if he'll come back up. Marcus hopes he will, but he doesn't think he will, because those patients down there have been waiting for so long, and they're so very, very hungry for company. Story 4. The Wrong Operating Room. Dr. Sarah Chen was a surgical resident in her final year at Metropolitan General Hospital in Chicago, and she thought she'd seen every variation of operating room mishap. Equipment failures, anesthesia complications, wrong site surgeries narrowly avoided by protocol, the endless small disasters that medical training prepares you for. But nothing had prepared her for what happened during her overnight trauma call on January 14th. The patient came in at 1:37 a.m., a 34-year-old construction worker named David Martinez who'd fallen from scaffolding and ruptured his spleen. Clear-cut case. Unstable vitals, internal bleeding, needed emergency splenectomy. Sarah's attending surgeon, Dr. Phillips, was scrubbing in, and Sarah would be assisting. Standard trauma procedure that she'd done a dozen times before. They wheeled Martinez into OR 6, the designated trauma bay. Sarah had worked in OR 6 countless times. It was large, well-equipped, with excellent lighting, and the newest surgical robot for complex procedures. She knew every instrument tray, every monitoring station. The familiarity was comforting as they began the rapid process of prepping the patient. Anesthesia put Martinez under. The nurses prepped and draped the surgical field. Dr. Phillips entered, hands raised after scrubbing, and took his position. Sarah stood across from him, ready to assist. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Dr. Phillips made the first incision, a midline laparotomy, opening the abdomen to access the damaged spleen. The initial cut was clean, precise, exactly as it should be. Then he paused. Sarah saw his eyes above the surgical mask narrow in confusion. "This isn't right," he said quietly. Sarah looked into the surgical field. For a moment her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. The organs inside Martinez's abdomen were wrong. Not diseased or damaged, just wrong. They were in the incorrect positions, for one thing. The liver was on the left side instead of the right. The stomach was visible where the spleen should be. But more disturbing than the reversed positions was the appearance. The organs looked old. Not old like diseased tissue, but old like preserved specimens. They had a gray, waxy quality like organs stored in formaldehyde. Situs inversus, Sarah suggested, referring to a rare congenital condition where organs are mirror-imaged. But that should have shown up on the CT scan. This isn't situs inversus, Dr. Phillips said, his voice tight. These organs... He trailed off. Sarah watched as he carefully moved intestinal tissue aside, searching for the spleen. The tissue felt wrong under his instruments. Too firm, too cold. That's when Sarah noticed the smell. Operating rooms have a distinctive odor, blood, betadine, the ozone scent of electrocautery. But now there was something else underneath, something chemical and wrong, like embalming fluid. She glanced at the anesthesiologist, Dr. Kumar, to see if he smelled it too. Dr. Kumar was staring at his monitors with an expression of complete confusion. "I'm not getting any readings," he said. "Blood pressure shows 0. Pulse ox shows 0. EKG is flatlined. But that's impossible. I have him on the ventilator right now. I can see his chest rising." Dr. Phillips straightened up from the surgical field, his hands still inside Martinez's abdomen. "Check the patient identification band right now." One of the nurses moved to check the wristband. She lifted Martinez's arm, and Sarah heard her gasp. "Dr. Phillips, this isn't David Martinez." "What do you mean it isn't Martinez?" "We wheeled him directly from the ER. The wristband says, it says unknown male deceased, 1987. The operating room went completely silent except for the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. Sarah felt her scalp prickle. Deceased. 1987, that was 36 years ago. "That's impossible," Dr. Phillips said, but his voice was shaking. "We admitted Martinez 30 minutes ago. I saw him. I spoke to him. He was conscious and oriented." Sarah looked at the face of the patient on the table, visible above the surgical drape. It was Martinez's face. Or was it? Now that she looked closely, the features seemed slightly off. The skin tone was wrong, grayer than living skin should be, and there was no bleeding from the surgical incision. Despite the large opening in his abdomen, there was no blood pooling in the surgical field. The edges of the incision were dry. "Dr. Kumar, what was his temperature when you put him under?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kumar checked his records, his face going pale. "Core temperature reads 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That can't be right. That's close to room temperature. Nothing living has that temperature." Dr. Phillips slowly withdrew his hands from the patient's abdomen. "Everyone stop. Stop everything. We need to..." He paused, seeming to realize he had no protocol for this situation. "We need to close and get out of this OR. Now." That's when the lights changed. The bright surgical lights that had been illuminating the operating table flickered, dimmed, and took on a sickly green tint. The color was wrong, nauseating, making everything in the OR look like it was underwater. Sarah looked up at the lights, and her breath caught in her throat. The operating room had changed. The walls were no longer the clean white tile she'd seen when they entered. They were painted a dark green, the paint peeling and water-stained. The equipment looked old, decades old, the kind of surgical tools Sarah had only seen in medical history museums. The monitors and screens that should have been showing Martinez's vitals were gone, replaced by mechanical gauge-based devices with cracked glass faces. "What's happening?" one of the nurses whispered, her voice verging on panic. Dr. Phillips was staring around the room, his face gray behind his mask. "This is OR3, he said quietly. "This is what OR3 looked like before it was renovated, but OR3 was sealed off in 1987 after the incident." "What incident?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "There was a patient, a man who came in for emergency surgery. He died on the table." But something went wrong. The surgical team, all four of them, the surgeon, the resident, the anesthesiologist, the surgical nurse, they all said the same thing afterward. They said the patient kept moving during surgery, reaching up, trying to grab the instruments. But he was dead. The monitors showed no signs of life. They were operating on a corpse. They were so traumatized that two of them never practiced medicine again. The hospital sealed the OR and opened a new one. Sarah felt cold spreading through her body. What was the patient's name? I don't remember. Some unknown man found in an alley. A John Doe. The patient on the table moved, not a muscle spasm or post-mortem reflex. His hand rose from where it had been lying at his side, moving smoothly, purposefully. His fingers curled around the edge of the surgical drape and pulled it down from his face. The face that looked up at them was Martinez's face, but the eyes were wrong. Milky white, filmed over, but somehow still seeing. His mouth opened and a voice came out, dry, whispering, speaking English with a strange accent from another era. You opened me, the corpse said. You weren't supposed to open me, I was sleeping. Finally sleeping. Why did you wake me? Dr. Phillips backed away from the table, pulling Sarah with him. Everyone moved toward the door, slowly. They began to back away, but the door to the OR seemed farther than it should be. The room had gotten larger, the walls stretching. Sarah could see other operating tables now, emerging from the shadows at the edges of the room. Each table held a patient under a sheet, and the sheets were moving, rising and falling as if the bodies beneath them were breathing. You shouldn't have opened me, the corpse of Martinez repeated, sitting up now despite the gaping incision in his abdomen. Gray organs were visible through the opening, but no blood. Never any blood. I died in 1987. I died here in this room, and I was supposed to stay dead. But you keep cutting people open in this place. You keep disturbing us. We want to sleep. Why won't you let us sleep? The sheets on the other operating tables were moving more vigorously now. Hands emerged, pushing the sheets away. Bodies sat up, corpses in various states of decay, all wearing hospital gowns, all with the surgical drapes still around their necks from long-ago operations. They turned their heads towards Sarah and her team with movements that were jerky and wrong. Run, Dr. Phillips said. Run! They ran. The door was suddenly closed again, and they crashed through it into the hallway outside. Sarah expected to emerge into the familiar second-floor surgical corridor of Metropolitan General. Instead, they stumbled into a hallway she didn't recognize. The floor was older linoleum, cracked and yellowed. The walls were that same sickly green. The lights were dim, many of them burned out. This wasn't their hospital. This was the hospital as it had been decades ago before renovations and modernizations. They were trapped in some version of Metropolitan General that shouldn't exist anymore. Behind them, through the door to OR3, Sarah could hear shuffling sounds. The corpses were coming. She could hear the squeak of gurneys, the shuffle of hospital slippers on linoleum, the dry whisper of voices speaking in medical jargon from another era. Dr. Kumar pointed down the hallway. The stairwell. If we can get to the stairwell, maybe we can get out. They ran through corridors that were familiar, but wrong. Taking turns they knew should lead to the stairwell. Dr. Phillips was in front, then one of the nurses, then Sarah and Dr. Kumar. The second nurse was behind them, and Sarah heard her scream. She looked back and saw hands emerging from an open doorway, gray and skeletal, grabbing the nurse and pulling her into the darkness. Keep going, Dr. Phillips shouted, though Sarah could hear the horror in his voice. We can't stop. They found the stairwell. The door was heavy, the kind with a push-bar handle. Dr. Phillips slammed into it, and it opened. They tumbled through onto a landing. The stairwell looked right. Modern construction, proper lighting. They were back. They'd escaped. They ran down the stairs, their footsteps echoing, and burst out on the ground floor. It was the proper hospital. The modern hospital. The lobby was ahead with its reception desk and the night security guard reading his phone. Normal. Real. They stood gasping in the hallway, looking at each other. The three remaining members of their team, Dr. Phillips, Sarah, and Dr. Kumar. The two nurses were gone, lost in that place that shouldn't exist. "What do we tell people?" Dr. Kumar asked, his voice hollow. "Who's going to believe us?" Dr. Phillips was staring back at the stairwell door. "We tell them there was a complication. We tell them the patient coded during transport and we lost him. We tell them the nurses were exposed to a contaminated substance and are in isolation. We can't tell anyone the truth. They'll think we're insane." "What about Martinez?" Sarah asked. "The real Martinez, where is he?" As if in answer, Sarah's pager went off. She checked it with shaking hands. A message from the ER. "David Martinez stable. Spleen injury not as severe as initially thought. Conservative management. No surgery needed." Sarah showed the message to Dr. Phillips. He read it and closed his eyes. "We never had Martinez on our table," he said quietly. "We had someone else. Something else." They reported to the hospital administration that there had been a critical incident in OR 6. An investigation was launched, but when the investigators examined OR 6, they found nothing unusual. No old equipment, no green walls, no bodies on tables, just a modern, well-equipped operating room. The two nurses were listed as no-call, no-shows and were fired in absentia, despite Dr. Phillips's protests. Sarah finished her residency, but she didn't pursue a surgical career. She went into dermatology instead, where the most dangerous thing she'd face was a suspicious mole. She never operated again. She couldn't, because every time she stood in an operating room, she saw those other tables in the shadows, those sheets moving, those gray hands reaching. Dr. Phillips retired early, citing health reasons. Dr. Kumar transferred to a hospital in another state. None of them spoke about what happened that night, not even to each other. What would be the point? No one would believe them. Hell, sometimes Sarah didn't believe it herself. But she knows it was real. She knows because she still has nightmares about OR3, about the corpse sitting up and asking why they woke him. She knows because 6 months after the incident, she received a letter. It was addressed to her, care of the hospital, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with names written in careful, old-fashioned script. 8 names. At the top of the list, David Martinez, 1987. She researched the names. All of them were patients who had died during surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital over the course of 50 years, all in OR3. All John does or Jane does with minimal identification. The last 2 names on the list were recent. They were the names of the 2 nurses who disappeared that night. Sarah keeps the letter in a locked box in her closet. She's never shown it to anyone. Sometimes she takes it out and looks at those names, wondering if OR3 is still there in some version of the hospital that overlaps with the real one. Wondering if those corpses are still waiting on their tables, disturbed from their sleep. Wondering if they're adding new names to their list. Most of all, she wonders what would happen if someone accidentally wheeled a patient into OR3 again. Because operating rooms in hospitals are always busy, procedures happening around the clock. Sooner or later, some resident working a night shift, exhausted and distracted, is going to open the wrong door. They're going to wheel a patient into an operating room that shouldn't exist. And when they make that first incision, they're going to find something that isn't quite human looking back at them from the surgical field. Something that's been waiting for decades for someone to wake it up again. Story 5. The abandoned pediatric ward. Elena Rodriguez had been a nurse for 19 years before she took the position at Riverside Medical Center in rural Oregon. It was a step down in prestige from the major metropolitan hospitals where she'd built her career, but she needed the change. Her divorce had been brutal, and she wanted distance from her former life. Riverside was small, only 120 beds, but it served a wide area of farming communities and offered a chance to start over. The hospital was old, built in the 1960s, and showed its age in every cracked tile and flickering light. But it was clean, well-staffed, and the community valued it. Elena settled in quickly, working the night shift in the medical surgical ward. It was busy enough to keep her engaged, but calm enough that she could handle it without the burnout she'd felt at her previous job. There was one wing of the hospital that was always locked, always dark. The fourth floor, the old pediatric ward. It had been closed in 2003 when a new children's hospital opened in the larger town 30 miles away. Too expensive to maintain a full pediatric unit for the relatively few children who needed hospitalization in the area. The rooms sat empty, the equipment moved to other departments or sold off. The hospital administration kept talking about renovating it for other use, but budgets were tight. So it just sat there, locked and abandoned. Elena had been working at Riverside for 3 months when she first heard the sounds. It was a quiet Tuesday night in February around 2:30 a.m. She was at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor charting medications when she heard it. Children laughing. Faint, muffled by distance and walls, but definitely children's voices. Several of them playing and laughing the way kids do. She looked up, confused. There were no children in the hospital that night. The youngest patient was a 17-year-old who'd come in with appendicitis. She mentioned it to Tom, the nurse working with her that night. "Oh, you heard the kids from 4, Tom said casually, not looking up from his own charting. "The 4th floor is closed," Elena said. "Yeah. Doesn't stop the noise, though." Tom finally looked at her, registering her confusion. "You didn't know? The 4th floor is haunted as hell. Has been since it closed. The kids up there play every night around 2 or 3 in the morning. You get used to it." Elena stared at him. "You're telling me there are ghost children on the 4th floor?" Tom shrugged. "I don't know what they are. Ghosts, residual energy, acoustics playing tricks. I'm a nurse, not a paranormal investigator. But everyone who works night shift has heard them. Some people have seen them. I don't go up there personally. I suggest you don't either." Elena wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but the sounds continued. Over the next few weeks, she heard them almost every night. Laughter, running footsteps, the distinctive squeak of the wheels on pediatric IV poles. Once, she heard singing. Children's voices singing "Ring Around the Rosie" in that eerie minor key that children somehow naturally find for that particular song. Her curiosity grew. Elena was a rational person, someone who believed in science and evidence. Ghosts weren't real. There had to be an explanation. Maybe teenagers were breaking into the 4th floor to party. Maybe there was some acoustic phenomenon carrying sounds from outside. Maybe it was pipes or HVAC systems creating sounds that resembled voices. On a particularly slow night in March, she decided to investigate. She took the staff elevator to the 4th floor at 2 a.m., armed with a flashlight and a practical determination to debunk this ghost story. The elevator doors opened directly onto the abandoned pediatric ward. The smell hit her first, that distinctive hospital smell, but old and stale. Disinfectant and dust and abandonment. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a nurse's station that was frozen in time. Charts were still on the desk, years out of date. A bulletin board held faded cartoons and health information posters. A coffee mug sat next to a computer monitor, a ring of ancient coffee residue at the bottom. The ward was laid out in a circle around the central nurses' station, 12 patient rooms, each visible through wide windows designed so staff could always see the children. Elena walked slowly around the circle, shining her light into each room. Beds remained, stripped of mattresses. The walls still had their cheerful painted murals. Teddy bears, rainbows, cartoon animals, all faded and peeling. Some rooms still had equipment. Outdated monitors, IV poles, one room with an old isolette that had probably been too bulky to move. It was sad, seeing this place that had once been full of life and care sitting empty and forgotten. But it wasn't scary. It was just sad. Elena completed her circuit of the ward and stood at the nurses' station feeling slightly foolish. No ghosts, no mysterious phenomena, just an abandoned hospital ward slowly decaying. She was about to leave when she heard it. A single voice, very clear, very close. "Are you a nurse?" Elena spun around, her flashlight sweeping the area. Standing in the doorway of room 408 was a little girl. She appeared to be about 7 or 8 years old, wearing a hospital gown. She was pale, thin, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked completely real and solid. "What are you doing up here?" Elena asked, her nurse instincts overriding her surprise. A child alone on an abandoned floor was dangerous, regardless of how she'd gotten there. "Where are your parents?" The little girl tilted her head, studying Elena with dark eyes. "I asked first. Are you a nurse?" "Yes, I'm a nurse. My name is Elena. What's your name, honey?" "I'm Sophie Chen. I'm in room 408. She pointed back at the doorway she'd emerged from. "That's my room." Elena approached slowly, keeping her voice calm. "Okay, Sophie, can you tell me why you're up here? Are you lost?" "I'm not lost. I live here." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, as if Elena was the one being silly. "I've been here a long time, since I got sick. My mom comes to visit, but not at night. At night, it's just us kids. Us kids." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She shined her flashlight past Sophie into room 408. The room was empty, just the bare bed frame and the faded teddy bear murals on the wall. She looked back at Sophie, and the little girl was smiling. "You can see me," Sophie said, delighted. "Not all the nurses can, most of them can't. They just hear us. But you can see me." Elena's rational mind was screaming that this wasn't real. Children don't appear in empty hospitals. Ghosts don't exist. But her eyes were showing her a little girl, standing solid and real in the flashlight beam. She could see the rise and fall of Sophie's chest as she breathed. Could see the small scar on her left arm where an IV had probably left its mark. "Sophie," Elena said carefully, "what year is it?" Sophie frowned. 2001, it's September. I missed the first week of school because I got sick, but maybe I can go back soon. Dr. Hammond says my counts are getting better. 22 years ago. Elena's hands were shaking. "Sophie, honey, what are you sick with?" "Leukemia, all they call it, but I'm in remission now. My mom says I can go home soon." Elena closed her eyes, then opened them again. Sophie was still there, watching her with those serious dark eyes. "Sophie, I need to check something. Can you stay right here?" Sophie nodded. Elena backed away slowly, not taking her eyes off the girl until she reached the nurses' station. Old patient charts were still filed there, years past any reasonable retention period. Elena ran her flashlight over the labeled drawers and found one marked 2001 closed charts. She pulled it open with shaking hands and flipped through the files. Chen, Sophie. Dobe, 3/15/1994. Diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Admitted 9/4/2001. Elena pulled the chart out and flipped through the pages, her flashlight beam shaking. Progress notes, lab results, medication orders. She flipped to the end of the chart. The last entry was dated September 19th, 2001. Patient expired at 3:47 a.m. following respiratory arrest, despite resuscitation efforts. Sophie had died 22 years ago in room 408 at 3:47 in the morning. She had been 7 years old. Elena looked up from the chart. Sophie was still standing in the doorway of room 408, but she wasn't alone anymore. There were other children now emerging from rooms all around the ward. A teenage boy on crutches, one leg missing. A toddler pulling an IV pole. A little boy with a bald head from chemotherapy. Twin girls holding hands. More and more children filling the ward, all wearing hospital gowns, all looking at Elena with the same hopeful expression Sophie had. "You can see us," Sophie said again. "That means you can help us. We need help." Elena wanted to run. Every instinct was screaming at her to get to the elevator and get off this floor. But she was a nurse. These were children. Even if they were dead children, they were still children. "What kind of help do you need?" Sophie walked closer. The other children followed, creating a semicircle around Elena. "We need someone to remember us." Everyone forgot. When they closed this floor, they took away all the pictures and the memory books and the cards from our families. They erased us. But we're still here. We're still sick. We're still scared. We need a nurse who can see us to remember that we were here. The teenage boy spoke up, his voice cracking with adolescent awkwardness even in death. "I'm Marcus. I was 14. I had bone cancer. They took my leg, but the cancer was in my lungs too. I died before I could get my driver's license. My dad said he was going to teach me." The toddler, who couldn't have been more than 3, said something unintelligible around his thumb. An older girl translated, "That's Tommy. He had a heart defect. He was only 2 when he died. He's trying to say he wants his mom." They all started talking then, a chorus of voices, each child telling Elena their name and their story. Diseases that had killed them, cancer, heart defects, cystic fibrosis, accidents that had left them too damaged to save. They had all died in this ward over the 20 years it had been open. Some had families that visited every day. Some had been abandoned by families who couldn't cope. All of them had died away from home in hospital beds, tended by nurses who cared but couldn't save them. And when the ward closed, their memories had been boxed up and stored away or discarded. The hospital wanted to move forward. Dwelling on the children who had died didn't fit with a modern positive image. So the 4th floor was locked and forgotten, and the children who had died there were locked in with it. "I remember you," Elena said, tears running down her face. "I see you. I remember you." Sophie smiled. It was a heartbreaking smile full of relief and sadness. "Thank you. That helps. It really does, but there's something else." Her smile faded. "There's another one here. Someone who doesn't belong. Someone bad." The other children nodded, their faces becoming frightened. Marcus spoke. "He started showing up about a year ago. He walks the halls at night. He goes into the rooms, he scares us. We're already scared of being forgotten, but we're more scared of him." "Who is he?" Elena asked. Sophie shook her head. "We don't know. He wears scrubs like a doctor or a nurse, but he's not like you. He's not someone who cared for us. He's someone who hurt us. When he comes, we hide. But you need to be careful. He doesn't like adults who can see us. He knows you're here now." Elena felt the temperature in the ward drop. Her breath began to mist in the air. The children's eyes widened with fear, and they started backing away, retreating toward their rooms. "He's coming," Sophie whispered. "You have to go. Now!" Elena didn't need to be told twice. She ran for the elevator, the sounds of children's screams rising behind her, but not playful screams, terrified screams. She slammed her hand on the elevator button, and the doors, thank God, opened immediately. She jumped inside and hit the button for the 3rd floor. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of the ward. A figure was standing at the nurse's station. A tall figure in surgical scrubs turned away from her, but she could see enough to know something was wrong with it. The proportions were off, the arms too long, the head tilted at an angle that wasn't quite right. It began to turn toward her. The elevator doors closed. Elena burst into the third-floor nurse's station, gasping. Tom looked up, startled. "Elena, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a—" He stopped, registering her expression. "You went up there, didn't you?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. Tom sighed and guided her to a chair. "Yeah, that's why I said don't go up there. The kids are sad but harmless. It's the other one you have to worry about, the one in scrubs. Nobody knows what it is or why it's there, but it's not one of the children. It's something else. Something that doesn't belong." Over the next few weeks, Elena researched the history of the fourth floor. She found records of the children who had died there, 47 children over 20 years. She made a list of their names, their ages, their diagnoses. She contacted some of the families, the ones she could find, and told them she was working on a memorial project for the old pediatric ward. Most of them were grateful. They had photographs, stories, memories they wanted to share. Elena created a memorial wall on the third floor in a quiet hallway near the chapel. Photos of all 47 children with their names and dates. A plaque that read, "In memory of the young patients who received care on 4th floor pediatrics 1983-2003. You are remembered. You are loved." The night after she installed the memorial, Elena heard the children on the 4th floor for the last time. But they weren't crying or screaming. They were laughing, playing, happy sounds. She never heard them again after that night. The 4th floor fell completely silent. But the figure in scrubs, that one remained. Other nurses reported seeing it occasionally, a tall shadow moving through the abandoned ward. And sometimes patients in the hospital reported seeing a person in surgical scrubs standing at the end of their bed in the night, just watching them. When they called for a nurse, the figure would be gone. Elena transferred to day shift 6 months later. She told herself it was for better work-life balance, but the truth was she couldn't handle the night shift anymore. Knowing that thing was up there walking the halls just one floor above where she worked. She'd helped the children find peace, but she'd also learned that some things that haunt hospitals aren't the spirits of the dead. Some things are older, darker, drawn to places of suffering and death like moths to flame. She thinks about Sophie Chen sometimes, and Marcus and little Tommy who just wanted his mom. She hopes they found their way to wherever children go after death, freed from the hospital that had held them. But she also thinks about the figure in scrubs still pacing the empty 4th floor, still waiting, still watching. And she wonders what will happen when the hospital finally gets around to renovating that space. When construction workers tear down walls and replace floors, will they release whatever that thing is? Will it spread through the hospital, no longer contained to one abandoned floor? Elena doesn't work at Riverside Medical Center anymore. She moved to a different state, took a job at a clinic that closes at 6 p.m. No night shifts, no hospitals. She tells herself she's being paranoid, but she still checks the news from Oregon occasionally, checking for stories about Riverside, checking for reports of something impossible and terrible walking through the halls, because she knows it's still there, still wearing scrubs, still watching, still waiting for the next person who can see it. And when someone finally does, when some unfortunate nurse or doctor looks up and makes eye contact with that thing, she doesn't know what will happen. But she knows it will be bad. The children on the 4th floor tried to warn her. They told her it was something that hurt them. And if it could hurt children who were already dead, Elena doesn't want to know what it could do to the living. Story 6. The Voice in the Psych Ward. Dr. Raymond Foster had worked in psychiatric medicine for 23 years, and he'd heard just about every delusion, hallucination, and paranoid fantasy the human mind could produce. Patients who believed they were Jesus Christ. Patients convinced that aliens were transmitting messages through their dental fillings. Patients who saw demons lurking in every shadow. He'd heard it all, and he'd learned to maintain professional empathy while internally categorizing these experiences as symptoms of chemical imbalances or neurological malfunctions. He'd never believed in the supernatural. Mental illness explained everything, until he met the patient in room 3B at Clearwater Psychiatric Facility in Seattle. The patient was admitted on a gray October morning, brought in by police after he'd been found standing in the middle of the Aurora Bridge, attempting to throw himself over the side. Not unusual, Clearwater specialized in acute psychiatric crises, and suicide attempts were a daily occurrence. The man was John Doe, 23 for that month, mid-40s, disheveled, nonverbal. No ID, no wallet, no way to identify him. He fought the restraints with surprising strength during transport, but once in the secure unit, he became completely catatonic. Raymond examined him during morning rounds. The man sat on the edge of the bed in room 3B, staring at the wall, completely unresponsive. His eyes were open but unseeing. He didn't react to voice commands, pain stimuli, or any external input. Full catatonic episode. Raymond ordered the standard protocol: IV hydration, benzodiazepines, careful monitoring. These episodes usually broke within 24 to 72 hours. But something about this patient bothered Raymond, though he couldn't articulate what. The man's stillness was profound, yes, but it was more than that. The room felt wrong. The temperature was off, slightly too cold despite the climate control. And there was a smell, faint but present, like ozone before a thunderstorm or electricity arcing through water. Raymond pushed the feeling aside. He was a scientist. Feelings weren't data. He moved on to his other patients. It was around 2 a.m. when his phone rang. The night nurse, Linda, her voice shaking. "Dr. Foster, you need to come to 3B, right now." Raymond dressed quickly and drove the 15 minutes back to Clearwater. When he arrived at room 3B, he found Linda standing in the doorway, refusing to go inside. The patient was still sitting on the edge of the bed, still staring at the wall. Still completely motionless. "What's the emergency?" Raymond asked, annoyed at being called in for what appeared to be an unchanged patient. "Listen," Linda whispered. Raymond stepped into the room and listened. At first he heard nothing unusual: the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant sound of someone crying in another room. The normal sounds of a psychiatric unit at night. Then he heard it. A voice, whispering, coming from the patient. But the patient's lips weren't moving. His mouth was closed. The voice was coming from him, but not from his mouth. "Help me," the voice whispered. "Please help me. He won't let me go. He won't let me leave. Please." Raymond approached the patient slowly. The whispering continued, a steady stream of pleas and prayers. The voice sounded young, male, frightened. But it wasn't coming from the patient's mouth. It was coming from inside him, from his chest or his throat or somewhere deeper, like the voice was trapped inside his body. "John Doe," Raymond said calmly, using his professional voice. "Can you hear me? Can you respond to my voice?" The patient didn't react, but the whispering voice grew louder, more desperate. "He's keeping me here. He's keeping all of us here. We can't get out. He's so strong. He's so angry. Please, you have to help us. He's going to do it again. He's going to make us watch." Raymond's skin prickled. This wasn't catatonia. This wasn't any psychiatric condition he'd encountered. He pulled out his phone and activated the voice recorder. "John Doe, I'm Dr. Foster. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me who's keeping you? Can you tell me where you are?" The patient's mouth opened then, not to speak, His expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on the wall, but his jaw simply dropped open like a puppet with a cut string. And from his open mouth came a different voice. Deeper, older, filled with malice. "You can't help them. They're mine, all mine. Go away." Raymond stumbled backward. The patient's mouth snapped shut. The whispering resumed, multiple voices now overlapping. Men, women, children, all whispering at once. "Help us, help us, help us. He won't let us go. He makes us watch. He makes us do things, terrible things. Help us, please God, please help." The voices cut off abruptly. The patient slumped forward onto the floor. Raymond and Linda rushed to him, checking vitals. He had a pulse. He was breathing. But he was completely unresponsive now, not even the catatonic stare. Just unconscious. They moved him to the bed. Raymond ordered a full neurological workup, CT scan, MRI, EEG, the works. Maybe this was a tumor, maybe this was a seizure disorder presenting in a bizarre way. There had to be a medical explanation. The tests came back normal, completely frustratingly normal. No tumors, no lesions, no seizure activity, brain structure perfect. Blood work unremarkable. The patient was, by all medical measures, healthy. Except he wasn't. Over the next 3 days, the voices continued. They were loudest at night, between 2 and 4 a.m. Staff members refused to enter room 3B alone. The whispers came from the patient constantly. Sometimes one voice, sometimes dozens. They all told similar stories. They were trapped. Something was keeping them. Something inside the patient was collecting them. Raymond researched obsessively. He read psychiatric literature, neurological journals, case studies of rare disorders. Nothing matched. In desperation, he started reading things he'd never considered before. Cases of alleged possession, accounts of mediums and channeling, paranormal research. He felt like a fool, but he was out of medical explanations. On the 4th night, Raymond decided to try something unconventional. He brought in a voice stress analyzer and a video camera. He set them up in room 3B and waited for the voices to start. They didn't disappoint. At 2:17 a.m., the whispering began. Raymond spoke to the patient, or to whatever was inside the patient. "I'm listening. I want to help. Can you tell me who you are?" A young woman's voice answered, clear and distinct. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 19 years old. I was killed in 2015. He took me. I was walking home from a party and he followed me. He hurt me. And when I died, he didn't let me go. He kept me. He's kept all of us." The voice stress analyzer was going crazy, showing patterns that indicated the speaker believed they were telling the truth. Raymond's hands were shaking as he adjusted the camera. "Who is he? Who kept you?" The patient's body convulsed. The deeper, malicious voice returned, roaring from the patient's mouth. "Shut up, shut up, shut up. You don't talk to them. They're mine." Multiple voices began screaming all at once, a cacophony of terror and rage. The patient's body thrashed on the bed despite the restraints. Raymond backed away, hitting the emergency call button. Staff flooded in. They sedated the patient heavily, enough medication to knock out someone twice his size. The voices stopped. The patient went limp, and for the first time since admission, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Raymond. His expression was lucid, aware, and absolutely terrified. "Kill me," he whispered in his own voice, the first words he'd spoken. "Please, kill me. It's the only way to let them go. He's been with me since I was a child. I've held them prisoner my whole life. I didn't know. I didn't understand, but now I do, and I can't live with it. You have to kill me." Then his eyes rolled back and he was gone again. Back to that unreachable place. Raymond reported everything to the hospital director. He showed him the recordings, the voice analysis, the testimonies from staff who'd witnessed the phenomena. He expected to be dismissed, laughed at, possibly referred for his own psychiatric evaluation. Instead, the director's face went pale. This has happened before, he said quietly. Not here, but at other facilities. Patients who seem to contain something. Something that keeps the dead. We have protocols for this. Protocols we don't talk about. The director made a phone call. Within hours, a team arrived from outside the hospital. Psychiatrists, but also others. A priest, a rabbi, a woman who identified herself as a spiritual specialist. They went into room 3B and performed something that wasn't quite an exorcism, wasn't quite a ritual, but something in between. Raymond wasn't allowed in the room, but he watched through the observation window. He saw the patient convulse and scream. He saw things that defied explanation. Objects moving without being touched. Lights flickering. Temperature plummeting so low he could see everyone's breath. He saw the patient's body lift from the bed, suspended in midair for a full 30 seconds. Then abruptly it was over. The patient collapsed onto the bed and went still. The team emerged from the room exhausted and shaken. The priest was bleeding from his nose. The rabbi was praying quietly. The spiritual specialist looked at Raymond with haunted eyes. "It's done," she said. "We couldn't save him. But we freed them. All the ones he was keeping. They're gone now." "Is he dead?" Raymond asked. "Not yet, but he will be soon. What was living inside him, keeping him alive for 43 years, is gone. His body will fail within hours." She was right. The patient, they never did identify him, died at 6:47 a.m. Cardiac arrest. His body simply stopped, as if whatever had been animating it had departed. But Raymond knew the truth. The man had been a prison. Something had taken root in him, probably when he was a child, and it had been collecting the dead, trapping them, feeding on them somehow. And when that thing was finally expelled, the souls it had been holding were released. The hospital's official report listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest due to unknown causes. The incident was classified. The recordings Raymond had made were confiscated. He was required to sign an NDA. He couldn't talk about what had happened, not to colleagues, not to friends, not to anyone. But Raymond couldn't forget. He'd spent 23 years believing that mental illness explained everything, that the human mind was simply a machine that sometimes malfunctioned. He'd been wrong. There were things that psychiatric medicine couldn't explain. Things that lived in the spaces between science and the supernatural. He left Clearwater 6 months later. He still practices psychiatry, but differently now. He listens more carefully when patients talk about voices. He pays attention when they describe things that shouldn't be possible. Because he knows that sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the voices aren't symptoms of illness. Sometimes they're real. Sometimes they're the voices of people trapped in places they shouldn't be. And sometimes the monsters that patients fear in the dark are actually there. Raymond thinks about Sarah Mitchell sometimes, the 19-year-old girl whose voice he heard first. He thinks about all the others who were trapped in that patient, unable to escape, forced to witness whatever terrible things the entity inside him had done. He hopes they found peace when they were released. He hopes they're somewhere better now, somewhere that isn't a prison inside a living man's body, but he doesn't know. He has no way to know. What he does know is that he'll never forget the voice in room 3B. The desperate whispers, the screaming, the final terrible moment when the patient looked at him with lucid eyes and begged to die. And sometimes, late at night when the hospital is quiet, Raymond stands outside psychiatric units and listens. Just listens. Wondering if somewhere in one of those rooms, in one of those patients, there's another prison. Another collection of trapped souls. Another voice crying for help that no one believes is real. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And next time, he'll know what he's hearing. Next time, he won't dismiss it as delusion or hallucination. Next time, he'll act faster. But he also wonders how many others are there. How many people walking around are unknowing prisons for the dead? How many voices are whispering from inside living bodies trapped and terrified with no one listening? The thought keeps him awake at night, and he has no answers, only questions, and the memory of that deep, malicious voice saying, "They're mine." Story 7. The Transplant Recipient. Dr. Lisa Park was a transplant coordinator at St. Michael's Medical Center in Boston, and she'd facilitated over 300 organ transplants during her 12-year career. She'd seen the miracle of transplantation from every angle: the desperate families waiting for organs, the tragedy of donors who gave life through death, the recipients who got second chances. It was difficult, emotionally exhausting work, but it was meaningful. She was saving lives. But what happened with patient 7847, a liver transplant, recipient named Michael Donnelly, made her question whether some transplants came with more than just new organs. Michael was 42 years old, a high school English teacher who'd developed acute liver failure from an autoimmune condition. He'd been on the transplant list for 8 months, getting progressively sicker when a match finally came through. The donor was a 36-year-old man named James Keller, killed in a motorcycle accident. Perfect match, healthy organs, everything aligned. The surgery went flawlessly. Michael woke up in the ICU, groggy but alive. Lisa did her standard post-transplant check, reviewing his vitals, medication regimen, rejection prophylaxis. Everything looked perfect. His body was accepting the new liver beautifully. By all measures, the transplant was a success. Then 3 days post-op, Michael started talking about the nightmares. "I keep seeing it," he told Lisa, his face pale and drawn. "The crash. I'm on a motorcycle going too fast. There's a truck. I try to swerve. I can't. The impact. I'm flying through the air, then nothing." Lisa frowned. "You're probably processing the trauma of surgery. Vivid dreams are common with the anesthesia and pain medications." "It's not a dream," Michael insisted. "It's a memory. But it's not my memory. I've never been on a motorcycle in my life. I'm terrified of motorcycles, but I remember this crash like I lived through it. I remember the sound of the metal crumpling, the smell of gasoline, the feeling of my body breaking." Lisa assured him it was just his mind processing stress, but she made a note in his chart. Over the next week, Michael's physical recovery continued perfectly. His liver function tests were excellent. But his mental state deteriorated. He became obsessed with the crash he kept dreaming about. He drew pictures of the intersection where it had happened. He described the truck in precise detail. A red Kenworth with a chrome bumper, the driver a bearded man in a flannel shirt. He remembered road signs, buildings, landmarks. "I need to know where this happened," Michael told Lisa on day 10. "I need to see if it's real." "Michael, you need to focus on your recovery," Lisa said gently. "These dreams will fade. They're not real memories." But Michael wouldn't let it go. He described the crash to his wife, who, against Lisa's advice, looked up recent motorcycle accidents online. She found it. James Keller, age 36, killed in a motorcycle accident on Route 2 outside Worcester. The details matched Michael's descriptions perfectly. The red truck, the intersection, even the time of day, sunset, with the sun in the rider's eyes. Michael had been sedated in a hospital bed in Boston when James Keller died on that road. There was no way he could know these details, but he did. Lisa tried to rationalize it. Coincidence. Information he'd subconsciously absorbed from news reports or overheard conversations. The brain was good at constructing false memories from fragments. There had to be an explanation. Then Michael started knowing other things. Things about James Keller's life. He mentioned a woman named Rachel, saying he missed her desperately. He talked about a black Labrador named Duke. He hummed songs that he'd never heard before but somehow knew all the words to. He developed a craving for black coffee, though he'd been a tea drinker his entire life. He started saying phrases in Italian, a language he'd never studied. Lisa accessed the donor's records, something she wasn't supposed to do, but she needed to know. James Keller had an ex-girlfriend named Rachel. He'd owned a black Labrador. He'd been of Italian descent and spoke the language fluently. He'd been a coffee enthusiast, ran a blog about artisan roasts. Michael was somehow accessing James Keller's memories. Through the liver. Through the transplanted organ that had been keeping James alive until the accident killed him. Lisa knew this was impossible. Organs don't store memories. Memories are in the brain, in neural pathways and synaptic connections. A liver is just a liver, a filtering system, a chemical processing plant. It doesn't think, it doesn't remember. But Michael's knowledge continued to expand. He talked about places James had visited, people James had known, experiences James had lived. He developed skills he'd never had. He picked up a guitar and played complex pieces, though he'd never learned an instrument. He could navigate Boston's North End like a native, though he'd always needed GPS there. He knew the layout of an apartment in Somerville that turned out to be where James had lived. It got worse. Michael started having emotions that weren't his. Grief for James's dead mother, who'd passed away 2 years before. Anxiety about James's sister, who was struggling with addiction. Anger at James's father, who'd abandoned the family when James was 12. These weren't Michael's feelings, but he experienced them as vividly as his own emotions. "It's like there are two people in my head," Michael told Lisa during a checkup, tears streaming down his face. "I'm still me. I still remember my life, my wife, my job. But he's there too. James is there. His memories are mixing with mine. Sometimes I can't tell which thoughts are his and which are mine. I don't know who I am anymore." Lisa consulted with the hospital's psychiatric team. They diagnosed him with depersonalization disorder, a dissociative condition. They prescribed antipsychotics and anti-anxiety medication. But Lisa knew it wasn't a psychiatric condition. This was something else, something the medical establishment had no framework to understand. She started researching, going down rabbit holes of transplant literature. She found scattered reports, anecdotal, dismissed by mainstream medicine, of transplant recipients developing traits of their donors. Personality changes, new food preferences, changed sexual orientation, memories that didn't belong to them. The phenomenon was called cellular memory, and it was considered pseudoscience by serious researchers. But the reports were there. A heart transplant recipient who suddenly loved classical music, discovering later that their donor had been a violinist. A lung transplant patient who developed an inexplicable fear of water, learning afterward that their donor had drowned. A kidney recipient who started craving foods they'd been allergic to, finding out those were the donor's favorite foods. The cases were rare, easily dismissed, but they existed, and now Lisa was seeing it firsthand. Michael's condition stabilized physically. His liver was functioning perfectly, but his psychological state continued to fracture. He was living 2 lives simultaneously. He'd be teaching his high school class and suddenly be overwhelmed with James's memory of teaching motorcycle safety courses. He'd be eating dinner with his wife and find himself thinking in Italian, thinking about Rachel, the woman James had loved. 6 weeks post-transplant, Michael requested contact with James's family. This was highly unusual. Organ recipients and donor families typically remained anonymous unless both parties explicitly agreed to contact. But Michael was desperate. He needed to talk to people who'd known James. He needed to understand who was sharing space in his head. The transplant coordinator, Lisa's colleague who handled family communications, arranged a meeting. James's sister, Amanda Keller, agreed to meet with Michael. Lisa attended, ostensibly to provide medical support, but really because she needed to see what would happen. The meeting took place in a conference room at the hospital. Amanda arrived nervous, clearly unsure what to expect from the man who was living with her brother's liver. Michael was equally nervous. They sat across from each other, awkward and silent for a long moment. Then Michael spoke. "He misses you. He thinks about you constantly. He's worried about your sobriety. He wants you to know he never blamed you for the fight you had. He understood why you needed space." Amanda went white. "How do you know about that?" "I don't know. James knows. He's in here." Michael pressed his hand to his abdomen over the site of the transplant. "He's showing me. He's showing me everything. Your mother's funeral, the rosary you gave him, the last time you talked 3 days before the accident. You fought about your boyfriend. James thought he was bad news. You told James to mind his own business. You haven't forgiven yourself." Amanda started crying. "We had that conversation in her apartment. Nobody else was there. How can you possibly know this?" "Because James remembers. And I'm carrying his memories. Now." Over the next hour, Michael described things only James could have known. Family secrets, private jokes, specific memories from childhood. Amanda was shaken but also clearly moved. She started talking to Michael as if he was James, or at least as if James could hear her through him. Lisa watched this unfold with a mixture of awe and horror. This wasn't psychiatric illness. This wasn't delusion. Michael was somehow accessing genuine memories from his donor. The liver, or something in the liver, had carried James Keller's consciousness into Michael Donnelly's body. After Amanda left, Lisa sat with Michael. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "This is unprecedented. We have no protocol for this." "I want it to stop," Michael said miserably. "I want to be just me again. I'm grateful for the liver, grateful to be alive. But I didn't sign up to share my head with someone else. It's torture, Lisa. I'm grieving for people I never met. I'm missing a woman I never loved. I'm angry about things that never happened to me. How long will this go on? Forever?" Lisa had no answer. Over the following months, she worked with Michael and a team of doctors who were quietly fascinated by his case. They ran tests, brain scans, psychological evaluations, even attempted past life regression therapy in case this was some kind of reincarnation phenomenon. Nothing provided answers. Nothing stopped the overlap between Michael's identity and James's memories. Gradually, something shifted. Michael began to integrate the two sets of memories, the two personalities. He stopped fighting it and started accepting that he was, in some strange way, both Michael and James. He remained married to his wife but stayed in contact with Amanda. He taught English at his high school but picked up motorcycle mechanics as a hobby. He was Michael Donnelly, who lived through James Keller's death and carried some essential piece of him forward. "I've accepted it," he told Lisa a year after the transplant. "I'm a hybrid, two people in one body. It's strange and it's hard, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I'm alive. James is alive through me. His death meant something. I'm living for both of us now." Lisa wrote up the case, changing names and identifying details, and submitted it to a medical journal. It was rejected. Too anecdotal, too lacking in objective evidence, too close to supernatural speculation. The medical community wasn't ready to accept that consciousness could be transferred through organs. But Lisa knows what she witnessed. She knows Michael Donnelly carries more than just James Keller's liver. He carries his memories, his emotions, fragments of his very soul. And she wonders about all the other transplant recipients out there. How many of them are experiencing things they don't report, afraid of being labeled crazy? How many are carrying pieces of their donor's consciousness, She thinks about the philosophical implications. If organs can carry memory, carry identity, what does that mean for the nature of consciousness? Is the brain really the sole seat of the self? Or is identity distributed throughout the body, stored in tissues and organs, capable of being transferred from one person to another? Lisa doesn't have answers. She has only Michael's story, and the knowledge that transplantation sometimes creates bonds deeper and stranger than medicine can explain. When someone dies and gives their organs, they may be giving more than just tissue. They may be giving pieces of themselves, their memories, their loves, their unfinished business. And the recipients who accept these gifts may be taking on more than they realize, more than a second chance at life. They may be accepting a merger, a joining, a permanent sharing of space between two souls that were never meant to occupy the same body. Michael seems to have made peace with it, but Lisa wonders how many others are suffering in silence, carrying donor memories they don't understand, experiencing emotions that aren't their own, slowly losing track of where they end and their donor begins. She's changed how she counsels transplant recipients. She asks more questions now. She listens for signs that they're experiencing more than just physical recovery. And when she hears those signs, she doesn't dismiss them as psychiatric symptoms because she knows the truth. Transplantation can save lives, but sometimes it merges them. Story 8. The hospital's basement morgue. Jacob Torres had worked as a morgue attendant at Grace Memorial Hospital in Philadelphia for 6 years, and he thought he'd become immune to death. He processed bodies with clinical detachment, filing paperwork, maintaining refrigeration units, preparing deceased patients for transport to funeral homes or the medical examiner. It was solitary work, suited to his introverted nature. Most people couldn't handle being surrounded by death. Jacob found it peaceful. The morgue was in the basement of Grace Memorial, a sprawling hospital built in 1947. The basement was a warren of storage rooms, maintenance corridors, and forgotten spaces. The morgue itself occupied the far eastern section, a large room with refrigerated storage units lining the walls, an autopsy suite that was rarely used, and Jacob's small office where he completed paperwork and ate his lunches alone. He'd been told when he was hired that the basement had a history. It had served as emergency triage during a major disaster in the 1970s, a nightclub fire that had killed 43 people. The basement had been filled with bodies far exceeding the morgue's capacity. Victims had been laid out in the corridors, in storage rooms, anywhere there was space. The hospital had been overwhelmed, and many of the bodies had remained in the basement for days before they could be properly processed. Some people say, "It's haunted," his supervisor had told him with a dry laugh. But it's a morgue. If any place should be haunted, it's here. You get used to the sounds. Old building, lots of settling, pipes creaking. Don't let it spook you. Jacob hadn't been spooked. He'd worked night shifts for 5 years without incident. The basement did make sounds, clangs and groans and occasional bangs that he attributed to the ancient infrastructure. Sometimes lights flickered. Sometimes he heard footsteps in the corridors that turned out to be echoes of his own steps. Normal building sounds. Nothing supernatural. But that changed on the night of March 3rd. Jacob was processing a patient who'd died earlier that evening, an elderly woman who'd passed peacefully after a long battle with cancer. Routine case. He was completing the death certificate, checking it for errors when he heard the sound. A voice, singing. Faint and distant, but unmistakably a human voice coming from somewhere in the basement. He looked up from his paperwork, listening. The voice was female, singing something slow and melancholy. He couldn't make out the words, but the melody was beautiful and infinitely sad. It seemed to be coming from the corridor outside the morgue. Jacob stepped out of his office and into the main morgue room. The refrigerated units hummed along the wall, each containing a body. The voice was clearer now, echoing through the basement. It was coming from the east corridor, the section that led to the old storage rooms. He grabbed a flashlight. The lights in that section were unreliable, and walked toward the sound. The corridor was lined with doors, most of them locked, leading to storage rooms filled with obsolete medical equipment and old files. The singing grew louder as he walked, pulling him forward. At the end of the corridor was a door Jacob had never opened. It was marked Emergency Storage, Authorized Personnel Only. He'd been told it was kept locked and was used for hospital disaster planning, stored supplies for mass casualty events. The door was ajar. The singing was coming from inside. Every instinct told Jacob to turn around, to call security, to not go through that door. But curiosity and a strange compulsion pulled him forward. He pushed the door open and shined his flashlight inside. The room was large, much larger than it should have been. It stretched back into darkness that his flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. The walls were bare concrete. The floor was the same, and lining both walls were gurneys, dozens of them, each with a body covered by a white sheet. The singing stopped. Jacob stood frozen in the doorway, his light sweeping across the scene. This wasn't possible. There were maybe 30 gurneys in this room, all occupied. The hospital morgue could only hold 12 bodies. Where had all these come from? Why were they stored here? He approached the nearest gurney and pulled back the sheet. The body, underneath, was an older man, burned badly. The kind of injuries you'd see in a fire. Jacob's stomach turned. He checked the next gurney, a young woman, also burned. The next one, a teenager, same injuries. They were all fire victims, all wearing clothing styles from decades ago. Bell-bottoms, polyester shirts, wide-collared jackets. Clothing from the 1970s. Jacob's mind raced. These were victims from the nightclub fire. They had to be. But that was over 40 years ago. These bodies should have been claimed, buried, cremated. Why were they still here, stored in this room? He heard movement behind him. He spun around, his flashlight catching a figure standing in the doorway. A woman in a nurse's uniform, but an old-style uniform, the kind with the white cap and dress that nurses stopped wearing in the 1980s. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back. Her uniform was stained with soot and blood. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "They're not ready yet." "Who are you?" Jacob managed to ask, his voice shaking. "I'm Nancy. I was working the night they brought them in, the fire victims, so many of them. We couldn't save them. We tried, but there were too many. We put them down here to wait for the families, but some families never came. Some of the victims were never identified. They just stayed." Jacob backed away slowly. "You're not real. You're not here." Nancy smiled sadly. "Neither are they, but they don't know that. They're waiting. They've been waiting for 47 years. Waiting to be claimed, waiting to be mourned, waiting to go home." The sheets on the gurneys began to move. Bodies sat up, the sheets falling away. Men and women and teenagers, all with burn injuries, all wearing clothes from the 1970s. They turned to look at Jacob with empty, hollow eyes. Their mouths opened and they began to sing. That same sad, melancholy song he'd heard earlier. It was a funeral hymn, he realized. A song for the dead. Jacob ran. He burst out of the storage room and sprinted down the corridor, the singing following him, growing louder. He ran through the morgue, past his office, up the stairs to the ground floor. He didn't stop until he was outside the hospital, gasping in the cold night air. He called his supervisor, told him everything. The supervisor sighed and said he'd come in. When he arrived an hour later, they went down to the basement together. The supervisor led Jacob to the emergency storage room. The door was closed and locked. The supervisor produced a key and opened it. Inside was exactly what was supposed to be there. Shelves of medical supplies, disaster kits, boxes of emergency equipment. No gurneys, no bodies, no nurse in a vintage uniform. "I told you the basement makes sounds," the supervisor said. "I told you people think it's haunted. This is why I don't hire people with overactive imaginations." But Jacob knew what he'd seen. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't stress. He'd seen those bodies, heard that singing, encountered that nurse who couldn't possibly be real. He quit the next day. He couldn't work in that basement anymore, knowing what was there. Knowing that the dead from the nightclub fire were still waiting in some pocket of space that overlapped with the real world. Waiting for families that would never come. Waiting to go home to graves that were never dug. The hospital hired a new morgue attendant, a pragmatic guy in his 50s who didn't believe in ghosts. He lasted 3 weeks before he quit, white-faced and shaking, refusing to explain why. Jacob heard through hospital gossip that others had seen things in the basement. A janitor reported seeing people in old-fashioned clothing wandering the corridors at night. A security guard reported hearing singing coming from locked rooms. A nurse working a late shift swore she'd seen a woman in a vintage uniform standing at the end of a hallway, just watching her. The hospital administration dismissed these reports. Old building, overworked staff, tricks of light and sound, nothing supernatural. But they had trouble keeping staff willing to work the basement. They had to increase pay for those positions, offer bonuses for night shifts. Even then, turnover was high. Jacob found work at a small funeral home in the suburbs. He still worked with the dead, but it felt different, clean, final. Bodies that had been mourned and prepared for burial, not bodies trapped in limbo, still waiting after decades for someone to care that they'd died. But sometimes, late at night, when he's alone in the preparation room, he hears singing. That same melancholy hymn. And he knows that the victims of the nightclub fire are still in that basement at Grace Memorial, in that room that exists and doesn't exist. Still waiting, still hoping that someone will claim them, still singing their sad song for the dead who were never properly mourned. And he wonders how many other hospitals have spaces like that, rooms that hold the forgotten dead. Places where tragedy imprinted so strongly on reality that it created permanent echoes. Places where the dead wait in spaces between the living world and wherever they're supposed to go next. Grace Memorial still operates, still treats patients, still functions as a modern hospital. And in the basement, in a room that most people can't see, the victims of a fire from 1977 are still lying on gurneys. Still wearing their bell-bottoms and polyester, still waiting for someone to take them home. Nancy, the nurse who couldn't save them, is still there too. Still trying to comfort them, still apologizing that there were too many, that she couldn't help them all. Still stuck in the worst night of her life, replaying it over and over for 47 years. Jacob sometimes thinks about going back, about trying to help them somehow, to give them the closure they need, to move on. But he doesn't know how. He's a morgue attendant, not a priest or a medium or whatever you'd need to be to help ghosts find peace. So they remain, waiting in the basement of Grace Memorial Hospital, singing their funeral hymn in a room that's full and empty at the same time. And Jacob tries not to think about them, tries not to hear that singing in his dreams. But he knows they're there. And he knows that someday someone else will open that door. We'll see those gurneys. We'll hear Nancy's sad voice saying they're not ready yet. And he hopes that person is stronger than he was. Hopes they can help where he couldn't. Because those dead deserve peace. They deserve to be mourned. They deserve to finally go home. But Jacob fears they never will. Some tragedies are too big, too sudden, too overwhelming. They leave marks that can't be erased. They create spaces where the dead get trapped, unable to move forward. And hospitals, places where death happens constantly, where grief is a daily occurrence, are full of those spaces, full of echoes, full of the dead who never quite left. Jacob knows this now, and he can never unknown it. The dead are everywhere, in every hospital, in every morgue. Most of them move on, but some stay, some wait. Some sing sad songs in empty rooms, hoping someone will finally hear them and care that they died. And in the basement of Grace Memorial Hospital, they're still singing.